In the news tonight, His Majesty the King leads a ceremony for the graduation of a new class of cadets at the King Hussein Air College. The United States says it could launch airstrikes and act jointly with Iran to support the Iraqi government against insurgents. And Israeli forces step up the search for 3 teenage settlers they say were abducted in the occupied West Bank. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, led the graduation of the 43rd class of cadets at the King Hussein Air College. At the outset of the ceremony, the Supreme Commander inspected the graduates who paraded in front of the podium. The Air College Commander noted that the ceremony took place amid the Kingdom's celebrations of national occasions. He welcomed the graduates as the falcons and protectors of the country's airspace, borders, security and stability. The King decorated the air cadets with their wings and presented awards to outstanding graduates. Among them were cadets from Bahrain. He also watched displays by pilots of the Royal Air Force fighter jets, helicopter gunships, training and transport aircraft. Also joining the graduation ceremony were Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mish'al al-Zabin, His Royal Highness Prince Rashid Ibn al-Hassan, and senior military and civic officials. The Jordan Atomic Energy Commission hosted the annual meeting of the Board of Representatives of the Cooperative Agreement for Arab States in Asia for Research, Development and Training related to Nuclear Science and Technology, Eurasia. The meeting aims to develop a business strategy for the agreement on technical cooperation projects and the development of the proposed priorities and a review of the evolution of the work of existing projects. It also seeks to discuss obstacles that hinder the implementation of the projects and develop a mechanism to overcome them. The Eurasia is an agreement supported by the International Atomic Energy Agency with membership of 9 Arab countries from Asia: Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Qatar, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Syria, Yemen, as well as a number of other countries as observers. Khalid Tuqan, chairman of the Jordan Atomic Energy Commission, praised success achieved in the execution of Eurasia projects last year, when the percentage of success in implementation reached 89%. Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Joudeh said Jordan will spare no effort to work towards achieving the two-state solution between the Palestinians and Israel. He said in remarks at a meeting of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees UNRWA that Jordan is exerting efforts at the regional and international levels for the resumption of Palestinian-Israeli peace talks that address all final status issues. Joudeh said in the address delivered on his behalf by the Foreign Ministry's Secretary General that UNRWA is providing key education, health and social services to more than 5 million Palestinian refugees. UNRWA's new Commissioner General Pierre Cronball thanked Jordan for hosting the relief agency's consultative meeting. He also pointed to the challenges facing the agency to preserve the level of services to the refugees. The United States said it could launch airstrikes and act jointly with Iran to support the Iraqi government. The U.S. position was made after militants from the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant ISIL routed the Iraqi army and seized the north of the country in the past week. After they overran Mosul and Tikrit, ISIL fighters and allied Sunni tribesmen seized another town, Saqlawiya, west of Baghdad, where they captured 6 Humvees and 2 tanks. The militants have earlier controlled the northern city of Tal Afar after heavy fighting. Fighters also swept through towns and cities on the Tigris. A spokesman for the Iraqi counter-terrorism forces said Iraqi security forces killed dozens of ISIL militants over the past 24 hours. Iraq's army is holding out in Samarra, a city that is home to a Shiite shrine, and life continued as normal in Baghdad, despite concerns over Sunni insurgents heading towards the Iraqi capital. Fugitive Vice President Tariq al-Hashimi said the violence in Iraq is part of a broader Sunni Arab revolt in the country and not just a rampage by militants. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry called the militants' advance an existential threat for Iraq. Britain said it had already reached out to Iran in recent days. The Kurdistan Regional Government in northern Iraq says its share of total Iraqi oil sales should be as high as 25%. The autonomous region argues budget cuts from Baghdad had driven it to pursue independent oil sales outside the federal government's control. The Baghdad government's collapse in the north has allowed forces of the Kurdish region to advance, seizing the long-disputed city of Kirkuk and rural areas with vast oil reserves. Oil prices have risen on the world market due to the deteriorating situation in Iraq. Here's more.
Shias volunteer to fight in Basra. There's going to be no quick fix to the crisis in Iraq. That sent oil prices rising again. Brent crude almost touching $113 a barrel. Eugene Weinberg is head of commodity research at Commerzbank.
Iraq is one of the world's most important oil exporters and producers. It is now number 2 within OPEC, behind Iran. Even a small reduction of Iraq's output will have a huge impact on the oil price. We already have several other conflicts. The situation in Libya has deprived the market of 1.5 million barrels a day, and another 500,000 barrels are missing due to sanctions against Iran.
But Iran is now touted as a possible solution to the crisis caused by the advance of Sunni militants. There's even talk between Iran and the US. Darren Sinden from Titan Investment says that would have been unthinkable a few months ago.
It's unknown territory to some extent because obviously diplomatic relations between those two countries are frosty at best. But Iran does seem probably to be the best bet to try and create some kind of regional solution. In the interim, I think both gold and oil will continue to rise. Gold obviously could head back towards $1,300 an ounce, and we look for both Brent and WTI probably to increase in the near term.
The weakness of the government is a worry, but there's no immediate threat to Iraq's oil supplies, as most are hundreds of miles south of the fighting. Any attempts by the militants to venture in that direction is also expected to be met with far tougher resistance than in the north.
Meanwhile, the United Nations has relocated 58 staff to Amman from Baghdad and said it may move more people in the coming days. A UN spokesman said that before the 58 staff were relocated, the United Nations had less than 200 international non-essential and essential staff in and around Baghdad as part of its political mission in Iraq.
Some 58 staff have been moved from Baghdad to Amman, Jordan. The intention is to relocate them in Erbil in Iraq. Some other relocations may also take place in the next few days.
In neighboring Syria, at least 25 people were killed in barrel bomb attacks in the northern city of Aleppo. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the strikes occurred in the Al-Sukkari neighborhood of Aleppo, Syria's largest city, now divided between government and rebel forces. At least 2 children and 1 woman were among the dead, as were 2 men from a local governing council. The toll was expected to rise as a number of people were seriously wounded in the attack. UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Valerie Amos said the conflict in Iraq has made access of aid into Syria more difficult.
In terms of the impact on aid to Syria right now, I think it's too soon to tell. Of course, one of the border crossings that we have been looking at as a possibility of getting aid from Iraq into Syria is one of the border crossings that is now controlled by ISIS as a result of the recent action. So we would need to look at that.
Israeli forces expanded their search across the occupied West Bank for 3 teenagers they say were abducted by Hamas. Troops conducted pre-dawn door-to-door searches in 6 Palestinian towns, with most of the military efforts concentrated in the city of Hebron, where the settlers went missing on Thursday evening. Some 40 Palestinians across the West Bank were arrested overnight, including Hamas leaders and operatives, bringing to 150 the number of arrests since the search began. Such moves sparked street confrontations, which left at least 1 Palestinian dead. Meanwhile, family members and supporters of Palestinians jailed by Israel gathered at a sit-in tent in Hebron in solidarity with nearly 300 Palestinian prisoners on a hunger strike. The hunger strike began in April to protest against detention without trial. Egyptian Prime Minister Ibrahim Mahlab appointed a former ambassador to Washington as foreign minister and a university professor as minister for international cooperation. The cabinet spokesman said Samih Shukri had been named Egypt's new foreign minister. He said Najla Al-Ahwani is the new minister for international cooperation, which works with foreign entities to promote development in Egypt. Other ministers were expected to be named later in the day. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif and European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton met in Vienna ahead of a new round of nuclear talks between Tehran and world powers. The 6 powers have been holding talks with Iran on curbing Tehran's nuclear program in exchange for an end to Western sanctions. All sides are under pressure to reach a conclusion by July 20. A final agreement has been held up by differences over issues, including the number of uranium enrichment centrifuges that would be available to Iran. Iran said it is making low-enriched uranium to fuel a planned network of nuclear power plants, not to develop bombs as the West fears. At least 50 people were killed when gunmen in 2 minibuses sped into a town on Kenya's coast, shooting soccer fans gathered to watch a World Cup match in a television hall and targeting hotels and a bank. There was no claim of responsibility for last night's attack on the town of Pektoni, but police said Somalia's Al-Shabaab militant group was most likely to blame. Witnesses said there were about 30 gunmen. A police officer said all the victims were men, with no women and children killed. Kenya's Interior Minister described the attackers as bandits and said they left a trail of destruction behind them. It was the worst violence since last September, when a Shabaab gunman attacked a Nairobi shopping mall, leaving 67 people killed. Russia cut off gas to Ukraine in a dispute over unpaid bills. The dispute could disrupt supplies to the rest of Europe and set back hopes for peace in the former Soviet Republic. Russia said Kyiv missed a deadline for a $1.95 billion debt payment, and it would now only get gas it has paid for in advance. It insisted Ukraine must also ensure that it lets Russian gas flow through international pipelines to Moscow's clients in the European Union. Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said in a meeting with Gazprom CEO Alexei Miller that Ukraine's position to try to get a low price in gas talks is blackmail. A collection of 16 Chinese bonsai trees went on sale at Sotheby's in Hong Kong at an exhibition dubbed Living Sculptures, The Art of Bonsai. The exhibition features bonsai dating from the late 18th century to 2000 from a collection of Philip Hui, who says each tree reflects the aesthetic vision and skill of an artist combined with the will of nature. The star of the collection is an early 20th century sweet plum bonsai, which won a gold medal at the Nanjing Bonsai exhibition. Age and amount of cultivation play a part in the value of the trees, but they are expected to sell from between $6,500 to $130,000. To Brazil and the World Cup games, and though I did not want to take this story, our director Safi Sabbagh insisted that I do. Germany crushed Portugal 4-0 in their Group G match earlier this evening. Though it had been expected to be a close game between 2 strong sides, but Germany took control early on. Thomas Muller marked his 50th international with a hat-trick, and a thumping Mats Hummels header blew away a Portugal side whose misery was compounded by a needless 37th minute red card for Pepe. The result leaves Portugal looking nervously at qualification, with games against the US and Ghana to come. In a game played late last night, Argentina battled for a 2-1 win over debutants Bosnia in their opening Group F match. Although Argentina took the lead in the 3rd minute when Sead Kolasinac netted the fastest own goal in World Cup history, simply because he was in the wrong place, Argentina remained uncertain. But it was in the 65th minute when Lionel Messi struck with a dazzling run and sweet shot that went in off the post. Bosnia scored their first and sole World Cup goal in minute 85 from Vedad Ibišević, who shot it through Sergio Romero's legs. And in other sports news, former Formula One motor racing champion Michael Schumacher is out of coma. Schumacher had been in a medically induced coma since December when he sustained severe head injuries in a skiing accident in France. His spokeswoman said Schumacher left the medical facility in France and was admitted to a hospital in Lausanne, Switzerland, near his home, though it remains unknown what medical unit he has been admitted to. And finally, a quick look at the weather. A slight rise in temperature is expected tomorrow, whereby it will be relatively hot in most parts of the country, while winds will be northwesterly moderate. Further south, the Gulf of Aqaba can definitely expect very hot conditions with northerly moderate winds and slightly rough seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King leads a ceremony for the graduation of a new class of cadets at the King Hussein Air College. The United States says it could launch airstrikes and act jointly with Iran to support the Iraqi government against insurgents. And Israeli forces step up the search for 3 teenage settlers they say were abducted in the occupied West Bank. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tupan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.